Watch how to create a beautiful Halloween ink blended background and use a cute spooky stencil to spice it up. Don't ruin the background, but make it even better with die cuts. Color the funniest ghosts and turn everything into a fun Halloween card. You will also see how I create a bonus card from the leftover pieces after die cutting and use glow in the dark for an extra Halloween effect. Hello, it's CisVolk. Time to enjoy card making with me. I absolutely love these little ghosts. So today I will show you how I color them and how I use the Happy Halloween die as well. The products are from the Hello Autumn collection by Carla Creates for Vaessen Creative. This word die is more versatile than you might think. I'm going to use it in a way you may not expect. You can also see the popular action Wobbler dies here from the Guinea Pigs collection. I was actually planning to use them, but completely forgot about them while making the cards. They would be such a fun addition if you want to make the ghosts float around on your card. So maybe that gives you a fun idea for one or more of your Halloween cards. Let's start by creating a background on a piece of Florence smooth white watercolor paper in A6 size. The Distress Oxide colors I will be using are Fossilized Amber, Black Soot, Twisted Citron and Rustic Wilderness from Ranger. I build up the colors from light to dark and each time I return with the previous color to softly blend the shades into each other. I'm deliberately using watercolor paper because later on I will show you a fun technique that needs water. When the ink is completely dry, I can start working with the stencil. This is the Ghost stencil from the Hello Autumn collection. Before filming, I sprayed the stencil with stencil spray. That makes it slightly tacky, which helps prevent liquid from seeping underneath the stencil. I placed my card parallel to the lines on my work mat. I added a small dot in the corner of the stencil, so later on I can easily find the same position again for the second layer. The stencil is just a little too small to cover the whole card panel, and I mainly want the ghost to show at the top and bottom, so I will work in two separate sections. That is why I first position the stencil at the top of the card. I gently rub over the stencil everywhere to make sure the stencil spray sticks well to the paper. Next I take a piece of kitchen paper. I fold it a few times and spray it with water from a small spray bottle. Now I start dabbing all the open parts of the stencil with the damp kitchen paper. The water reacts with the ink, which allows me to lift some of the color from the paper. By dabbing instead of rubbing, the Distress Oxide ink reacts beautifully with the water and changes shade slightly. Every time the kitchen paper becomes saturated with ink, I turn it over and use a clean section that I spray damp again. I keep dabbing until all the dark green ghosts have become lighter. Just keep in mind, I only dab the dark green ghost with water. The yellow section in the middle stays plain yellow. When everything is finished, I don't remove the stencil straight away. This is watercolor paper, and because of the stencil spray, the stencil sticks quite firmly to the paper. If I would pull it off immediately, I could damage the paper or lift some of the ink. So first I heat the back of the paper with my heat tool, which melts the adhesive slightly and helps release the stencil more easily. At the same time it also dries the wet paper again. And now I can also heat the front a little, which makes the ghost stand out even better. That was the top section. Now we repeat the same process for the bottom. I keep shifting the stencil around until the ghosts that I created in the middle of the card panel line up nicely with the ghosts on the stencil. Then I repeat the whole process of dabbing with water and drying again. Once the paper is completely dry again, I place the stencil back in exactly the same position. This time I will make the ghosts even lighter with Distress ink in the color Picket Fence. This white Distress ink brightens the lighter areas even more, so the ghosts really start looking soft and floating. I move the stencil back to the top again to repeat the same step there as well. One last time I dry everything with the heat tool. This time I mainly do that because I will start die cutting next, and I want to keep my die cutting machine clean. I place the card horizontally and position both the outline and the text die in the middle of the card. To check if the die is straight, I use a ruler. If both top corners of the die are positioned at 4.5 cm from the top edge of the paper, then it is lined up correctly and ready for die cutting. As a final check, I make sure the inner die is evenly spaced inside the outer die on every side. That way we can also reuse the centerpiece later on for another card. I carefully keep all the letters and even the small inner pieces from the letters on a piece of black paper. That makes everything much easier to find again later. We are going to reuse every little piece. I die cut the Happy Halloween die 2 more times, this time from black cardstock. And again we keep every single piece. The 2 die cut shapes are glued exactly on top of each other. To make gluing easier, I use my heat resistant silicone mat. I place it right on top of my regular work mat, so the magnets underneath still work well. It is not only useful as a heat resistant surface, but what I really like is that glue doesn't stick to it. So after gluing, the work surface is very quick and easy to clean again. First I glue the die cut card panel onto a folded card base. This was the moment where I forgot I wanted to add the ghosts with the action wobblers. So if you want to use those, this is the moment to add them first. Apply glue or double-sided tape around the outer edges of the card and around the edges of the die cut opening, so everything will stay firmly in place. There are many ways to stick a card panel on a folded card straight. I now do it the quick way, where the folded edge of the card still sticks out a little too much for my liking. Because I don't want that white edge to stay visible, I go over it with my dark green foam tool. Now the edge blends in much better with the background. Any other edges that still stick out, I trim off with my guillotine trimmer. For me, this is a real must-have tool. I have glued the two black die-cut Halloween sentiments together with easy glue, and now I stick them on the card with the same glue. Because quite a lot of glue comes out of this larger bottle and I don't want thick blobs squeezing out from between the die cuts, I first dab some glue onto the brown mat before applying it to the card. The sentiment fits perfectly inside the opening of the card panel. I press it down firmly with a clear block and let it dry for a moment. For some extra pressure, I place the glue bottle on top. I carefully saved all the letters that came out of the green card panel, and now I glue them back into the openings one by one. I can even use the leftover glue on the brown mat for this. And if I accidentally add too much glue onto a letter, I simply dab it off again onto the mat. This glue doesn't leave much visible marks behind. For the inner parts of the letters, I use the leftover black die cut pieces again. And that is how I work my way through all the letters. The P, Y, L and O are connected together, so that part goes nice and quickly. If you cut the letters apart, you could even reuse them separately for words like hello or happy. The leftover green part of the sentiment will go onto a piece of black cardstock. There's now way too much glue on the brown mat, but luckily it wipes away very easily with a cloth or some paper towel. I glue all the inner pieces back into the letters. Make sure you place the correct shapes back into the right openings, because there are two P's, two E's and two A's. So pay attention that you don't mix up the darker and lighter pieces. Also make sure not to turn the shapes around. Look carefully at the direction of the opening so the original shape of the letter stays correct. I quickly wipe the mat clean again, roll it back up and store it in its original packaging. The two ghosts I want to use on the card and also the boo sentiment are stamped with VersaFine Onyx Black ink and heat embossed with clear embossing powder. By heating the embossing powder with a heat tool, you get a beautiful glossy stamped image with raised lines, which makes coloring much easier. I color the ghosts with Distress Oxide ink, using the same colors as I used for the background of the card. Enjoy watching! After cutting out the ghosts, I used the black marker trick again. You already saw this in some of my previous videos. I also used it on the postzegel cards with Hedgie, with that hedgehog. It is quite difficult to cut perfectly along all those tiny lines and spikes. For these ghosts that will go into a dark background, it actually looks nice when all the edges are black, so any little white edge blends in much better. Under the ghost I placed the release backing from a piece of double-sided tape. It is nice and smooth to work on. In the eyes of the ghosts I add white dots with a white gel pen. Normally I always add one white highlight inside the pupil. This time I also add 2 tiny extra dots next to the larger one to create a bit more sparkle in the eyes. It makes them look a little friendlier. I place the ghosts roughly where I want them on the card. That way I can also immediately see which areas still look a little empty and where I want to stamp the sentiment. I took the risk of stamping with my clear block instead of using my stamping platform. I want to stamp the word boo in the bottom right corner of the card. To stamp it straight, I look carefully at the lines on my clear block. I also check that the text on the right side does not extend further out than the Halloween word die. And I make sure not to stamp it too low, so everything still feels nicely balanced together. If you don't use an embossing pouch before applying embossing powder, there's always a chance that some extra powder sticks where you don't want it. Then you sometimes need to clean it up with a brush or a pointed tool. Luckily it is not too bad here. If you want to avoid that completely, just swipe over the paper first with an embossing pouch. I heat the powder in stages carefully because too much heat can loosen the tape or glue underneath the card layers. I now also attach the ghost with double-sided tape. If I had not glued the panel onto the card yet, then I still could have used the action wobblers. I could have pushed them through the card panel and the back would have been hidden behind the folded card. If I really still wanted to add them now, then I would have needed to cut through the folded card as well and cover the back with another stamped image or an extra piece of paper. Just in time I noticed I forgot to add the cute white dots on the cheeks. Always add them in an odd number. That usually looks nicer. After that I add a layer of glossy accents onto the die cut letters. That gives the letters a raised glossy finish. My bottle is getting a little old, so the glue comes out a bit uneven because it has thickened over time. But with a little patience I can still apply a nice layer everywhere. With a needle I can smooth things out a little more and also remove any air bubbles. Finally I draw some little stars and dots onto the background with a white gel pen. That creates a really fun dimensional effect. I think this card gives a little bit of a Ghostbusters vibe, don't you think? For the second card I already glued the leftover die cut piece onto a sheet of black cardstock. Now I am drawing shadow lines with the same white gel pen. Each time one longer line and one shorter line. I add them to the wider parts on the left side of the letters and also on the right side if a letter has 2 wider sections. This gives the letters a more rounded look. Here I have a piece of black Florence watercolor paper. I spray it generously with water on both sides. I do that because I want to emboss it with the 3D Ghost embossing folder. By moistening the paper first, the risk of cracks and creases is slightly reduced when we run it through the die cutting machine with the embossing folder. This embossing folder is also part of the Hello Autumn collection by Carla Creates for Vaessen Creative. It matches perfectly with the ghost stencil. You can see how beautifully the ghosts are pressed into the paper. I could let the paper air dry, but with a heat tool it is of course much faster. Sometimes 3D embossing also works on dry paper, but in my experience many papers will still crack a little. I place the embossed paper back into the embossing folder. Feel carefully if everything lines up properly and no longer shifts around. Then I place the matching stencil on top of the paper. A magnet can help keep everything in place, even with the embossing folder underneath. The embossing folder gives shape and support to the design, and the stencil now masks the background, so I can color only the ghosts. For this I use Picket Fence Distress ink. I apply the ink onto my work mat first, and I do that because I want to keep my ink pad clean. With a foam tool, I pick up the ink from the mat and carefully transfer it onto the paper. Actually, this technique is a little easier with a large blending brush. At that moment I just didn't have a clean large brush available, and a foam tool also works fine. But keep in mind that it can catch behind the stencil, and that can damage either the stencil or the tool, and you could accidentally ruin your project if you slip. If I would pick up the ink directly from the ink pad with the foam tool, then my ink pad could become dirty. A little black ink from the paper always transfers onto the tool and then back into the ink pad if you are not careful. Some ink got next to the stencil here, but that is not a problem because later on we will trim that part away anyway. Don't forget to clean the embossing folder before the next time you use it. Once again I dry the ink with my heat tool. On top of this panel I will place the Happy Halloween text that I already die cut earlier. I actually had a completely different card in mind, but that one failed and now it works perfectly on this fun ghost background. Because something went wrong filming, I will quickly show here on a small test piece of paper how I finished the card. I want to make some of the ghosts in the background glow with glow-in-the-dark embossing powder. First I decide which ghost would work best for that, and those are the ones I will treat with Versamark ink. First place the stencil on top of the embossed and white colored paper. Then apply a layer of Versamark ink onto the ghost of your choice. And of course you can also do all of them. You can apply the ink with a foam tool, but also with a brush. Tapping works best. Once I remove the stencil, you can see the ghost has become shiny. Now I apply the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder over the top. I'm using Glow Up by Ranger. After heating the powder, the ghosts get this effect. I now show it here on this little test piece. I add the cute eyes with a white gel pen. I add those eyes both onto the plain back ghosts and onto the ghost with the embossing powder. The gel pen surprisingly works really well on both. Inside the white eyes I now draw black pupils with a black pen or marker. By placing the pupils in different positions you can make the ghost look in different directions, and honestly that is the funniest part. The glow-in-the-dark effect first needs to charge under a bright lamp or in sunlight, and once it gets dark you will get a really fun effect. I tried to show it here with the light from my camera, but that is quite difficult, so I hope this still gives you a good impression. Now the ghost panel can be trimmed down a little bit. I remove the white border from one short side and I trim a little from the other short side as well, so the ghosts sit evenly along the edges. Then I measure on my trimmer with a ruler that this is about 7 mm wide, and I trim that amount in total from the long sides as well. I attach this card panel onto a folded card base with double-sided tape. While attaching it, I make sure to leave a small border visible around all sides of the panel. The Happy Halloween cutout can now be attached onto the card with 3D foam pads. And if you like, you could also add a colored ghost, with or without an action wobbler. Here you can see both cards side by side. As you can see, I used all parts of the Halloween die on two completely different cards. And I hope I gave you enough tips and inspiration once again to help you create something fun yourself. Will you let me know in the comments below this video what you think of these cards? I always love reading your messages and seeing which card is your favorite. You can find more inspiration on my socials, where I also share reels, shorts and new card ideas. You will also find my shop links and product information underneath this video. And if you choose to shop through those links, you help support my channel at no extra cost to you. I hope to see you again next time. Bye bye!